A millionaire founder walks into his private bathroom and discovers a cleaning lady fast asleep on the toilet lid. To his surprise, he finds himself falling hopelessly in love with her. Before we dive into the story, please leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. Now, sit back and enjoy the tale. Sandra Michael was at her breaking point. She had been working double shifts for an entire week, cleaning hotel rooms during the day and covering the night shift for a lazy friend who always had a new excuse. Now, utterly exhausted and feeling like a zombie, she leaned on her mop for support. The VIP suite was her last task of the day, and all she wanted was to finish and finally get some rest. Please subscribe to my channel for more sweet videos like this. Let the story continue. And go home moving at the speed of a sleepy turtle. She stepped into the luxurious bathroom. It was the biggest she had ever seen, about the size of her entire apartment. Wow, this place is a palace. Who needs a bathroom this big? Does it have an echo? She murmured, pouring disinfectant into the sink. She scrubbed, wiped, washed. Exhaustion had put her on autopilot. But the worst was yet to come. She bent down to clean around the bathtub, leaned her head on her arm for just a second, and suddenly felt her body grow heavier. Just 5 seconds, just 5, and then she fell asleep right there, resting on the toilet lid. Robert Williams had just wrapped up an exhausting day of meetings. All he wanted was silence and a hot shower. As soon as he entered his suite, he took off his suit and tie, unbuttoned his shirt, and walked across the room straight to the bathroom. Thinking only of the soothing steam, he opened the door without looking around and stepped inside, and that's when he nearly had a heart attack. What the hell? His voice echoed through the bathroom, almost shattering the mirrors. Williams jumped back, his heart pounded, as if he were being attacked by a polar bear with a weapon there. Leaning against the toilet lid was a woman in a hotel uniform, sleeping in his bathroom. The shock was so intense that he almost threw his shirt at her. Like an exorcism, Sandra, in turn, woke up to the most terrifying scream she had ever heard. She jolted awake, lost her balance, and fell to the floor, knocking over the cleaning supply bucket. Oh my God, what's happening? Williams stepped back as if she were a ghost crawling out of the drain. Who are you? And what are you doing in my room? Sandra, completely disoriented, widened her eyes at the shirtless man in front of her. Tall, dark hair, intense expression, furious eyes, and incredibly handsome. She blinked a few times, tried process everything. Big bathroom, expensive soap scent, housekeeping uniform, the guest room. Reality hit her all at once. She froze. Then her eyes widened even more as she shouted, I didn't rob you, I swear. Williams blinked. What, I just fell asleep here? No, that sounded bad. Sandra raised her hands as if a police officer had a gun pointed at her. I was just cleaning, and then you decided to take a nap in my bathroom. Or is your cleaning technique about napping in guest bathrooms too? Sandra stammered. She was in trouble. It's not exactly like that. I mean, it is. But Williams pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to stay calm. So my bathroom is a dormitory now. It was a very quick nap. Oh sure, just a little 30-minute nap on the toilet seat. It was only 10 minutes. Do you have a stopwatch in your brain or something, sir? I know this looks bad, but I work morning and night. My body just shut down. Williams took a deep breath. He wanted to be mad. He did. But for some reason, the whole situation was so absurd that he just couldn't. She looked desperate, her face flushed with embarrassment, her hair a mess, and staring at him as if her life depended on this moment. And then Williams did something completely unexpected. He crossed his arms and walked out of the bathroom toward the kitchen. Sandra quickly followed. He stopped, turned to her with a serious expression, and asked, do you drink coffee? Sandra blinked. Huh, coffee? Do you drink it? Yes. But what does that have to do with? He grabbed a cup from the counter and handed it to her. Try it. Still confused, Elle took the cup and smelled the coffee. She immediately made a face. This is terrible. Williams raised an eyebrow. You could tell just by the smell. Sandra hesitated. A curious glint passed through his eyes. Robert Williams, the man who never cared about anything other than business, was intrigued, and Sandra, who just wanted to get out of there with her job intact, had no idea what was coming next. Sandra was still holding the coffee cup like it was a bomb about to explode. Williams watched her with an unreadable expression, arms crossed, his intense gaze locked on her. She had no idea what to do. So, am I fired? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Williams tilted his head as if considering the idea. I haven't decided yet. Sandra felt her knees go weak. You haven't? He took the cup back and looked at the dark liquid inside. Before that, explain to me how you knew this coffee was terrible without even tasting it. It's just obvious, she replied, frowning. It smells burnt. and the beans were over-roasted, which makes it too bitter. Looks like someone tried to cover it up with sugar, but that only made it worse. Williams raised his eyebrows. And you figure all that out just from the smell. Sandra opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. Wait, why was he so interested in this? I swear I don't do this all the time. She tried to play it down. I just noticed. Williams was silent for a few seconds, watching her like she was a complicated puzzle he needed to solve. And then out of nowhere, he stepped back and leaned against the counter. Perfect. You're going to help me fix this problem? Sandra blinked. I'm going to. What? The hotel's coffee is awful. I've complained, but no one can fix it. If you can tell what's wrong just by the smell, then maybe you can figure out what's wrong with the other dishes too. Sandra let out a humorless laugh. Oh, sure, because that's exactly what a cleaning staff member does. As of now, yes. She froze. Sorry, but I just do cleaning. I have nothing to do with food. Williams shrugged. Now, you do? Sandra looked at him like he had just suggested she jump out of a plane without a parachute. I can't just suddenly become a food expert, but you don't have to. He pointed at the cup. You already are. Sandra Michael opened and closed her mouth, feeling more confused by the second. He had to be joking, right? But his expression said he wasn't. Sir Robert, right. Look, I appreciate it, but I need my job. Williams frowned. And who said I'm firing you? Sandra stayed quiet for a moment. Was this a test? She was sure she was about to lose her job. And now the hotel's founder was asking for her help with food. None of it made sense. This isn't a test, is it? Like, if I say no, are you going to fire me? Williams sighed, already looking tired of the conversation. If I were going to fire you, I would have done it already. Now, come on, you've got a breakfast to taste. Sandra blinked, then again, and a third time. What do you want? To keep arguing or just get this over with? She knew she should say no, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fact that he still hadn't let her go. Maybe she had a chance to save her job. Sandra sighed. Fine, but if this is just a plan to fire me later, I swear less drama, more coffee. Sandra had no idea how she even got here. 1 minute, she was arguing in the founder bathroom. The next, she was sitting at one of the best tables in a hotel restaurant with a table full of fancy dishes. In front of her dishes, she was supposed to taste. Williams sat across from her, arms crossed. All right, try then, and tell me what you think. She looked at the plates, then back at him. You want me to eat all this? You work double shifts, right? When was the last time you ate? Sandra opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't remember. The silence was enough for Williams to get his answer. Exactly. Now eat. Sandra hesitated, then picked up a fork and tried the first dish. She made a face. The sauce is too acidic. Feels like they used too much lemon to cover up something that went wrong. Williams nodded, as if that confirmed his suspicions. Next, she tried a piece of meat and wrinkled her nose. Overcooked, and they used a seasoning that doesn't go with the dish at all. Another plate. Is this supposed to be sweet or savory? Because right now, it's just confusing. Williams leaned back as Cher, intrigued. She didn't just notice the mistakes, she described exactly what was wrong. And for the first time in a long while, he was impressed. Sandra wiped her mouth and looked at him. Okay, can I go now? Williams tilted his head. Have you ever thought about working with food? Sandra laughed. You mean eating bad food? No, identifying it. Sandra stopped laughing. What you have a rare talent. Most people wouldn't even catch half the mistakes you just pointed out. It's just a silly trick. It doesn't mean anything. Williams stared at her for a long moment like she just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. I bet people have said the same thing about you before. Sandra opened her mouth, but had no words. He was right. Williams stood up, adjusting his sleeves. Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to the kitchen. I want you to taste a few ingredients. Sandra's eyes widened. What? And don't try to run. I know. Where you work? Sandra nearly fell out her chair. Are you insane? For the first time that night, Williams laughed. Not yet. But give it time. Sandra spent the entire night trying to make sense of what had just happened. She should have been fired. Any normal person would have been kicked out of the hotel immediately for being caught sleeping on the founder toilet lid. But somehow, not only did she still have her job, she was now caught up in some random plan to improve the hotel's breakfast. Did it make sense? No. Did she want to be part of it? Also no. But Robert Williams didn't seem like the kind of man who accepted no as an answer. So the next morning there, she was dragging herself to the hotel kitchen, exhausted and mentally begging herself not to do anything that would get her officially fired. She pushed open the kitchen door and saw Diane standing next to the head chef. The founder glanced at his watch, then at her. You're late. Willie sighed. If you're going to fire me, just do it now. I only got 3 hours of sleep. Williams smirked. You'll survive. Now come here. The head chef, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Eduardo, eyed her suspiciously. This is the cleaning lady. He crossed his arms. What is she doing saving the hotel's breakfast? Williams answered flatly. Eduardo frowned. With all due respect, Mr. Robert, my team is highly trained. I don't think we need a cleaner's opinion. Sandra froze. She already felt out of place being here now. She had to deal with a chef who saw her as a joke. Williams, however, didn't even blink. I tasted the food yesterday. If your team was as qualified as you say, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The silence that followed was so heavy that Sandra wanted to disappear under the counter. Eduardo clenched his jaw, irritated. And what exactly does Miss Michael have to say about my kitchen? Williams gestured towards Sandra. Find out for yourself. Sandra froze. What you said, the coffee was terrible. Now tell me what's wrong with the other dishes. Eduardo let out a sarcastic laugh. Great, let's hear what the mop expert has to say. Sandra felt her face heat. What an unbearable man. But if he wanted a show, she would give him one. Taking a deep breath, Sandra grabbed a spoon and tasted one of the dishes. She chewed slowly, analyzing every flavor. The scrambled eggs are dry. You used low-quality butter, and the salt is off. Eduardo crossed his arms. What else? Sandra picked up a piece of bread and took a bite. The bread isn't fresh either. It was baked yesterday or stored poorly. All right. And the juice? She took a glass and sipped. She winced. This is a disaster. Eduardo raised an eyebrow. And why is that? Because someone mixed fresh orange juice with store-bought and added a generous touch of disappointment. Williams bit back a smile. Eduardo, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. All right, Miss Michael, if you're so smart, what do you suggest? Sandra looked at him for a moment, then turned to Williams. Can I speak freely, or am I risking my life? Williams chuckled. Speak freely. Sandra turned back to Eduardo. This is a five-star hotel. Guests expect high-quality food, but breakfast tastes like an airport cafeteria. If you want my opinion, you need to upgrade the ingredients. Real butter, fresh bread, farm eggs. The chef clenched his jaw. That costs money, and bad food costs customers. Eduardo turned red. Williams, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying himself. Then it's settled. We'll test Miss Michael's suggestions. Eduardo looked like he was about to swallow a bucket of boiling oil. This is an insult. I have years of experience, and this girl just came from cleaning. Williams shrugged, and yet she managed to point out every issue with your food in under 10 minutes. The chef snapped his mouth shut. Williams turned to Sandra. Well done. Now, go get some rest. Sandra left the restaurant feeling like she had just run a marathon, but for the first time, she felt like she had done something important, even if it was just fixing breakfast. Sandra was folding sheets in the laundry room when Carla burst in. Out of breath, Sandra looked up. What is it people are saying? You humiliated the chef in front of the founders. Sandra grimaced. I just told the truth. Carla's eyes widened. And he let you walk out alive, more or less? Carr grabbed her by the shoulders. Are you sleeping with him? Sandra choked on her saliva. What people are saying? You promoted you because you two are having an affair. Sandra buried her face in her hand. I'm going to disappear into the sheets and never come out. But before she could do that, the laundry room door opened. Eduardo walked in. Miss Sandra Michael swallowed hard. High. Eduardo took a deep breath. I wanted to say that I was an idiot this morning. Sandra, you were right. We changed the breakfast ingredients, and the guests loved it. Sandra blinked, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. Eduardo was apologizing. He held out his hand. Can I count on your opinion when we try new dishes? Sandra looked at his hand, then at Carla, who looked even more shocked than she was. With a sigh, she shook the chef's hand. As long as I don't have to wash the dishes afterward. Eduardo laughed. Deal. Carla held back a squeal. Sandra didn't know how, but she had just earned a new role at the hotel, and she had no idea where it would lead. Sandra still couldn't believe what had happened that morning. She, a simple housekeeping staff member, had managed to challenge the hotel's head chef, fix breakfast, and somehow survive the experience. Not just survive, she was now officially someone people listened to when it came to food, but that also meant the rumors were spreading like wildfire in the hotel halls. What started as Sandra slept in the seats bathroom quickly turned into Sandra, and the founder had a private moment in the bathroom. And by noon, it had escalated to Sandra is having a secret affair with the boss and now has free access to the kitchen. She tried to ignore the curious stares and the whispers behind her back as she changed the sheets in one of the rooms. But it wasn't working. So you're the hotel's new favorite now. The irritating voice of Julio, one of the Receptionist made Sandra sigh before even turning around on the. Sandra knew official tester of bad food. That's all Julia crossed her arms funny. No one has ever been promoted this fast in this hotel. You must have done something special to get Mr. Robert attention like that. Sandra rolled her eyes. Do I need to spell it out? I slept in his bathroom, and instead of firing me, he made me taste bad coffee. That's the whole story. Julia raised an eyebrow, not buying it. Sure, I'm sure that's all it was. Sandra took a deep breath. Look, I'd love to stay and listen to your crazy theories, but I actually have a job to do. Excuse me. She grabbed her cleaning cart and pushed it down the hall before Julia could say anything else. The only thing she wanted now was for Williams to leave her alone. Hopefully, he had already forgotten his ridiculous idea of making her try more dishes and would let her go back to her normal life. But she should have known Robert Williams never forgot anything late in the afternoon, just as she was about to leave and finally get some rest. Sandra received a message from Carla. Chef Eduardo wants to talk to you. In the kitchen, you better go before he throws you into the soup pot. Sandra sighed. This never ends. When she got to the kitchen, Eduardo was waiting with his arms crossed, but this time he didn't look like he was ready to attack her. Mr. Robert wants to see you in the restaurant now. Sandra sighed again. He never gets tired, does he? Eduardo smirked. You're still breathing. So I guess not. Resigned, she made her way to the restaurant, where she found Williams sitting at a table, studying a menu with the same intensity. As someone making stock market decisions, I should start charging for these consultations, Sandra said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Williams looked up at her. Very funny. I try. He set the menu aside and looked at her for a moment. I have a proposal for you. Sandra blinked. That doesn't sound good. You like it? I doubt it. Williams ignored her and went on. There's a major food event happening in Paris next week, one of the biggest in the world. Sandra just stared at him, waiting for the part that made sense. Okay, and I want you to come with me. She blinked again. What you heard me. I want you to come with me. She let out a laugh, not believing what she was hearing. Wait, you want me to go with you to some fancy food event in Paris? Exactly. She laughed even harder. I'm a housekeeper, Robert. The first clean rooms and scrub toilets. You want to go to Paris? Just to tell you, if a dish is bad. Williams leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his expression serious. You have a special talent, a refined palate, something most people don't have. I want you to help me identify the best chefs and ingredients. Sandra shook her head, still in disbelief. I don't even know where to start with how crazy this is. First, I shouldn't even be here. Second, who says I know what I'm doing? I do. She opened her mouth to argue, but the conviction in his eyes stopped her. He believed in her, and that made her uncomfortable. I can't accept. Williams frowned. Why not? Because it's ridiculous. I don't know anything about these events. I didn't either the first time I went. She scoffed. That's different. You're a founder, and you have a gift. Sandra didn't know what to say. Had anyone ever said something like that to her before? Had anyone ever believed she was truly good at something? She lowered her gaze to the table. I have a job here. I'll pay you twice what you make at the hotel. Her eyes widened in surprise. What? It's only fair considering you'll be helping me. She still couldn't believe this was happening. I can't just drop everything. You don't have to. It's just a 3-day trip. Sandra bit her lip, trying to ignore the feeling that she was walking into a trap, but at the same time, when would she ever get an opportunity like this again? I need to think. Williams nodded. That's fine, but don't take too long. Sandra left the restaurant feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Was she considering this? Was she crazy enough to travel with Robert Williams? Maybe she was, but she wasn't ready to admit it, yet she spent the rest of the day trying to push the thought away. She focused on her work, folding bed linens, clean rooms. But every time someone mentioned Robert Williams' name, a strange chill ran down her spine. Had he made that ridiculous offer her in Paris, as if she were someone important, as if she were someone who mattered to him beyond being just an employee who by sheer accident had caught his attention? Every time she thought about it, the most logical explanation came to mind. He was messing with her. There was no other reason. And yet, when her shift ended and she returned to her small rented apartment, she collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. The trip was in 4 days, 3 days. If she said yes, she'd be boarding a plane with Williams, going to an event where she knew no one, didn't understand the rules, and would probably feel like a complete fool. But if she said no, Sandra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It was a once In a lifetime opportunity for years, she had been told she wasn't good enough for anything other than hard labor. No one had ever looked at her and said, "You're talented." No one had ever believed in her, and now Robert Williams, the founder of the hotel, was saying she was special, that he wanted her by his side, helping him pick the best chefs and dishes, even if it was a mistake, even if he was wrong for the first time. Sandra wanted to believe that maybe there was something inside her that was worth something, and before she could change her mind, she picked up her phone and typed a message, "Okay, I'm in." Seconds later, his reply arrived. "Great, get ready for the trip." She let out a long sigh. What on earth was she doing the day of the trip arrived? Faster than Sandra expected. She woke up before her alarm, packed her bag with clothes borrowed from Carla. Because according to her friend, if you're traveling with a billionaire, at least try to look rich, and headed to the airport with sweaty palms. Williams was waiting in the VIP lounge, dressed impeccably. As always, he looked completely at ease, as if this were just another ordinary day. For him, Barry, it felt completely surreal. "You're on time. That's a miracle." Louie rolled her eyes. "I thought about running away, but my bank account convinced me to stay." Williams chuckled. That's the spirit. Before she could overthink it, she was being let onto the plane. But of course, this wasn't just any plane she had flown before, but always crammed into economy class, hoping she wouldn't end up next to someone snoring. Now she was on a private jet with soft leather seats, real food being served, and enough space to dance if she wanted to. "Okay," she said, looking around. "This is way nicer than the flying buses I'm used to." Williams gave a small smile. "Good to know. I'm already impressing you." Sandra sank into the seat and let out a sigh. "You don't need to impress me, Robert. You just need to make sure I don't embarrass myself in Paris. No promises." She turned to look at him. "You enjoy torturing me, don't you?" "One of my favorite pastimes." The plane took off, and Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the butterflies in her stomach. She was going to Paris with Robert Williams. Nothing in her life had ever been this surreal. The hotel they were staying at looked like something out of a movie. Trimmed furniture, sparkling chandeliers, luxurious carpets. Everything looked so expensive that Sandra was afraid to touch anything. But the worst was yet to come. That night, Williams took her to an exclusive dinner before the main event, and that's when Sandra realized just how deep she was in trouble. Everyone in the room seemed to belong to a world she would never be part of. Women in long gowns and dangerously high heels, men in tailored suits, all holding wine glasses and speaking French like movie star. Sandra, in her borrowed dress, felt like a complete fraud among them. Williams, on the other hand, looked right at home. He moved through the room, effortlessly greeting important people, chatting with renowned chefs, while Sandra tried to act like she knew what she was doing. But then the moment she feared arrived. Miss Michael, right, a middle-aged man, approached, smiling politely. Sandra blinked a yes. Williams mentioned you have a special talent for identifying flavors. She shot a deadly glare at Williams, who only smiled like he was completely innocent of the man, picked up a wine glass, and handed it to her. "Then tell us, what year is this wine from?" Sandra looked at the glass as if it were poison. Williams just crossed his arms, enjoying himself. "Don't look at me like that. This is part of your job." Now, gritting her teeth, Sandra took a small sip. The wine was strong, full-bodied, but there was something different about it. She analyzed the taste and, without thinking, said this was aged in oak barrels, but there's a fruity note. It must be a recent vintage, maybe 3 years old. The man's eyes widened. "Exactly." Sandra froze. "What, you got it right." Williams smiled, satisfied. "See, I knew you were good at this." Sandra looked at the glass like the wine had just revealed the secrets of the universe. Had she gotten it right? Maybe being here wasn't such a mistake after all. The dinner continued, with Sandra being introduced to more and more people, and with each dish she tasted, her confidence grew just a little more. By the end of the night, as they were heading back to the hotel, Williams turned to her with an amused smile. "I admit it, you surprised me." Sandra scoffed. "I surprised myself." He stopped in front of her and tilted his head. "So still think you don't belong in this world?" She stared at him for a long moment. For the first time, she didn't know how to answer. Maybe she did belong. Maybe she had spent too much time thinking she wasn't good enough. Williams studied her for a few more seconds before giving a small smile. "You've got talent, Sandra Michael, and now that I know that I'm not letting you slip away." Sandra felt a shiver run through her. Robert Williams never said anything by accident, and suddenly she realized this trip could change much more than her career. It could change everything. Sandra woke up the next morning feeling like she was still dreaming she was in Paris in a five-star hotel traveling with a billionaire founder who, for some inexplicable reason, thought she had talent. If someone had told her that a week ago, she would have laughed in their face and told them to get help. But here she was lying in the most comfortable bed she had ever slept in, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how her life had flipped upside down. So quickly, sighing, she got up and walked over to the window. The view of the city was breathtaking. Historic buildings, busy streets, charming cafes, everything looked like it came out of a movie, and Sandra Michael, was right there in the middle of all of it. Notification sound made her grab her phone. It was a message from Williams. Breakfast at 8. Don't be late. Sandra rolled her eyes. Not even in Paris does he give a break. But despite mentally complaining, she took a quick shower, got dressed, and went downstairs to meet him. Williams was already sitting at a table in the hotel restaurant, reading something on his phone. Do you always arrive first everywhere? He looked up and gave her a smirk. Some call it punctuality, others call it efficiency. She sat down and picked up the menu, and I call it unbearable. He laughed. The waiter approached, and Williams ordered black coffee. Sandra, on the other hand, ordered a croissant and hot chocolate. You're not a coffee fan? Williams asked, raising an eyebrow. I like it, but we're in Paris. Hot chocolate here is practically a work of art. He didn't argue, just watched as she took her first sip and closed her eyes, sighing, my God, this is good. Williams smiled, shaking his head. You take food seriously. You brought me here for that, didn't you? True. They had breakfast without rushing, and Sandra noticed that for the first time his company didn't seem so strange. It was almost natural. When they were finished, Williams paid and stood up. We've got a busy day ahead. Don't tell me I'm going to have to try more mysterious wine. He laughed. Today is about food. We'll be doing tastings with some of the best chefs in France. Sandra's eyes widened. That sounds intense. You'll survive, she scoffed, but walked alongside. And the tastings took place in a private room at the food event, at where renowned chefs prepared dishes for a select group of guests. Sandra tried dishes she never even imagined existed, refined flavors, sophisticated techniques. And to her surprise, she realized she knew what she was doing. She pointed out small mistakes, identified secret ingredients, and even suggested improvements that made a few chefs raise their eyebrows and surprise. Williams watched her the whole time, his gaze a mix of satisfaction and curiosity. When the event ended, they were walking through the hall when an elegant woman approached, tall, blonde, wearing a tight, expensive dress with a smile that radiated absolute confidence. Sandra didn't know who she was, but she immediately recognized the type. Someone from World. Robert Williams, the woman said, smiling. Long time no see. Williams smiled politely. Meline, didn't expect to see you here. Paris is my second home, darling. And she glanced at Sandra. Got yourself some new company? Sandra felt a shiver run down her spine at the way the woman assessed her from head to Sandra. Michael Williams said casually, she's working with me. Meline smiled, but Sandra noticed the subtle spark of disdain. Oh, how interesting. And how exactly is she working with you? Sandra felt her stomach churn. She knew exactly what that question implied. Williams noticed too and furrowed his brow. Sandra has a special talent for flavors. She's helping me evaluate the dishes at the event. Meline feigned surprise. How curious. I could have sworn she was, well, something completely different. Sandra clenched her fist. She knew exactly what the woman was implying. Williams noticed her expression and placed a hand gently on her back, a small but protective gesture. It was good to see you, Meline, he said, ending the conversation. Meline threw one last glance at Sandra before smiling and walking away. Sandra let out the breath. She didn't even realize she'd been holding. Williams looked at her. Ignore it. She crossed her arms. You caught what she was implying, right? Yes. And that's why I shouldn't be here. Williams stopped, gently holding her arm so she would look at him. You're here because you have talent. What others think doesn't matter. Sandra bit her lip, looking away. Easy for you to say you're a billionaire and you smart, so stop worrying. She wanted to believe him, but part of her knew that people would never see someone like her as anything more than an outsider. Later that night, when Sandra was alone at the hotel bar, she saw Meline talking to Williams across the room, and to her dismay, they looked pretty close. She shouldn't care. Didn't make sense to care. But when Meline touched Williams' arm and he smiled. Sandra felt something twist inside her. She got up and left the room before she could figure out what it was. Minutes later, she was in her room, sitting on the bed, trying to convince herself that it was nothing, but her heart didn't believe it. And for the first time, Sandra realized that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to feel something for Robert Williams. Sandra spent the whole night trying to ignore the unease in her chest. She didn't care, or at least that's what she kept telling herself as she turned over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position to sleep. But every time she closed her eyes, the image of Williams and Maitline talking would pop in her mind. The way the woman touched his arm, the way he smiled at her, how they seemed to belong to the same world. What was Sandra doing there? She felt like a child, playing in an executive's office, a background character in a movie starring rich, sophisticated people. And now that she was there, she felt like everyone was just waiting for her to make a mistake so they could kick her out. And maybe that's exactly what she should do. When the sun rose, Sandra got up with a decision. She grabbed her phone and typed a message to Williams. The first thing, I'd better go home. Thanks for the opportunity, but I don't belong in this world. She stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. Done now. Just wait. But the response came too quickly. Meet me at the restaurant in 20 minutes. Sandra sighed. Great. She dressed reluctantly and went downstairs to the restaurant. She found Williams sitting at the table drinking coffee with a very unhappy look on his face. Good morning, she said, sitting across from him. You think you could just send me a message like that and run away? I'm not running away. I'm being realistic. He crossed his arms. Realistic? Yes. Look, Williams, the first appreciate everything you've done, but it doesn't make sense for me to stay here. He stared at her for a long moment before tilting his head. This is about Maitline. Sandra felt her stomach drop. What? No, of course not. Williams smirked. You disappeared right after you saw us talking. I was just tired. Michael, you're not good at lying. She rolled her eyes, grabbing a piece of bread and spreading butter on it, trying to act indifferent. It has nothing to do with that. I just think it was a mistake to accept this trip. Why? She dropped the bread and looked at him. Because I'm not like you, Williams. I'm not sophisticated. I don't speak French. I don't know how to act at these events. He saw the way Maitline looked at me, the way everyone looks at me. Williams sighed, rubbing his face. So that's it. You want to quit just because a few snob of people can't handle the fact that you're more talented than they are. I'm not more talented than anyone you are. Sandra stayed silent. Williams leaned over the table, his gaze intense. You think I brought you here for nothing? I don't waste my time with people who have no value. She felt her heart race. He rarely complimented anyone. He rarely said anything that direct, and damn, it made her want to believe him. But then Williams stood up and threw a card on the table. You have until noon to decide. If you want to leave, there's a flight back home reserved for you. But if you want to stay, meet me in the main hall at 2 p.m. Sandra looked at the card, then at him. Williams watched her for a moment before leaving the restaurant. She took a deep breath. Now, what staying meant continuing to deal with a world that didn't accept her, but leaving meant admitting she was running away. And Sandra Michael never ran from anything. When the clock struck 2, she was in the main hall. Williams didn't smile when he saw her, but there was something satisfied in his expression. Good. Now stop acting like you don't deserve to be here. And come with me. And Sandra, for the first time since she arrived, decided she was going to do just that. That afternoon's event was one of the most important of the food conference. Williams had meetings with investors, and Sandra had to attend a panel about new talents in international cuisine. She was determined to soak up everything she could, listen to the experts, pay attention to the details, try to understand what made a dish truly memorable. But while she was making mental notes, she overheard 2 women whispering behind her. Did you see that girl with Robert Williams? Yeah, they say he picked up a cleaning lady and brought her to Paris. Sandra felt her face flush. Must be some kind of whim of his, or maybe she has something special he likes, if you know what I mean. The 2 women laughed. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wasn't going to let it bother her. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, she turned around with a sweet smile and said in a friendly tone, "Oh, thank you for caring so much about my life. I'd love to continue this conversation, but I need to get back to the panel. After all, I'm here working. Can you say the same?" The 2 women were left speechless. Sandra blinked, turned around, and went back to paying attention to the panel. Feeling much better, she didn't have time to worry about small people. When she met Williams at the end of the event, he noticed something different about her. What happened? She smiled. I think I finally understand why I'm here. He raised an eyebrow. And why is that? Because I'm good at this, Williams smirked. Finally, Sandra felt light for the first time. She was there not because he chose her, but because she chose to be there. And that changed everything. Sandra never thought she could feel so comfortable in a place that just a few days ago seemed completely out of her reach. But there she was sitting next to Williams, evaluating dishes with some of the world's top food critics. And for the first time, not feeling like she was in the wrong place. She still attracted attention. That was inevitable. People still whispered when she walked by. They still looked at her like she was an outsider for being there. But now, Sandra didn't care anymore, and somehow that seemed to bother people more than if she had just given up and left. The night came quickly, and Williams organized a dinner at an exclusive restaurant for a few guests. The setting was elegant, the food impeccable, and the wine flowing freely. Sandra tried to follow the conversations around her, but realized she didn't have to try so hard anymore. She could already identify which ingredients were used in each dish. She could recognize the technical details of the preparations. She was learning, and Williams knew it. You're more confident, he said after the waiter served dessert. Do I seem more confident? Or, I finally, Williams smiled. Both. She picked up her fork and cut a piece of the dessert in front of her. What wrong? You look surprised, just satisfied. Why? He leaned a bit toward the table, eyes fixed on her. Because I knew you were good at this. I was just waiting for you to realize it too. Sandra felt warmth rise in her face, but covered it up by taking a sip of wine. Dinner continued normally until Maitline arrived. As always, she looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine, flawless and confident. She sat down at the table as if she were the hostess of the night and shot a sharp smile at Sandra. Darling, what a surprise to see you here. Sandra smiled back. I'm not a surprise anymore. I'm starting to become part of this world. Maitline raised her eyebrows. Is that what you think? Williams cleared his throat, interrupting their exchange of barbs. What brings you here? Maitline, she grabbed a glass of wine, swirled the liquid in the glass, and smiled a friendly warning. Sandra crossed her arms. Oh, that sounds interesting. Please go on. Madeline's eyes rested on Williams. You know this world is a game, and as much as you like to bring challenges to yourself, some things simply don't fit in it. Sandra noticed the quick glance the blonde threw her way. Williams remained unfazed. Maitline, I'm tired of your little games. If you have something to say, say it already. The woman smiled, leaning slightly forward. Have you ever stopped to think about how this might hurt your image? Bringing a cleaning lady to Paris, introducing her as if she's some kind of expert. People talk, Williams, and believe me, not everyone is happy about it. Sandra felt her blood boil, but before she could respond, Williams spoke up. Who cares about what they say? Maitline laughed. As if you were too naive. You darling, deep down you've always cared. You wouldn't have gotten where you are if you didn't know how to play this game. Williams held her gaze for a moment and then smiled, slightly funny. I always thought the game was about talent, and Sandra has that in spades. Maitline rolled her eyes. You think that's enough? Sandra, who had been holding herself back until then, decided it was time to speak up. Maitline, let me ask you something. The blonde stared at her, surprised that she was jumping into the conversation so directly. What exactly bothers you so much? The fact that I'm here, or the fact that you can't bring me down? The silence that followed was almost palpable. Maitline briefly hardened her expression, but quickly covered with smile. You think? Please subscribe to my channel for more sweet videos like this. Let the story continue.